A handy discovery. I was diving with some friends and found a fisherman's glove with a hand still inside of it. We brought the glove to the local police, and they told us that they hadn't received any kind of report of a guy with a missing hand. Are you really ever alone? Me and two buddies were on a night dive in the Puget Sound hunting prawns. It was about 1 a.m. and we're a good 100 feet deep, the darkest black you could imagine. And we used to do this thing on night dives where we'd get in a circle, turn off all our lights, then stir up the water and watch the bioluminescence float around us like floating stars in a black watery space. It was beautiful. Only this one time, we turned off our lights, stir up the water, and the water glows just enough to reveal a fourth person sitting in our circle. We were at a dive resort, so it wasn't so odd to see another diver. Only it was 1 a.m., and we'd seen no one else prepping for a dive at the dock. He was also alone, which was odd considering the dangerous conditions of a night dive in those waters, and he had no fins or gloves. Now, I don't know how he swam so well without fins, or didn't get hypothermia without boots or gloves. We wore dry suits because it was so cold, but this dude was in a wetsuit with exposed skin. We thought we saw a giant gash in one of the legs, so the three of us notice him, and we're too freaking scared to move. I can hear my buddies panting in their rigs, and the guy just smiles, waves, and then swims away. Whenever you think you're alone, someone just shows up, like in an alley at night. It's weird, but 100 feet underwater at night is terrifying. The living and the dead. I was diving off of Florence, Oregon coast with some friends, and we found a body on the ocean floor in the creepiest condition possible. He was a surfer who'd gone missing a few days prior, so he wore a wetsuit with his legs, arm, and head exposed. Crabs had eaten the flesh from his exposed bits, so basically he was just a torso with a skull and skeletal limbs. The abandoned memories. I like kayaking when I get the chance, but one day, in a lake up in Glacier National Park, Montana, I saw a small boat. It's a vintage, little-looking, tiny motorboat. The little tiny mini speedboats you always see in the 70s movies set in Miami or something. Just a few feet underwater, perfectly preserved. I could reach down and touch it. There were no signs of damage, no signs of why it sunk. It was eerie. I had to leave because for some reason it just freaked me out. The idea that something could just sit inches from the air but still submerged for years probably made me feel so uncomfortable. I don't know why. We see the red light. I was diving off the coast of Fiji, and we went through a natural tunnel, like a 10-meter cave/passage through a rock formation. So we start swimming through the cave, and suddenly the light is weird, like the blue tint from the water has been replaced by a red one. And now, all the divers will know that this isn't only weird because the color changed, but also because red is the first color to disappear after a certain depth, usually between 30 feet to 40 feet, and we were over 70 feet deep. Also, bear in mind, this was late morning on a sunny day. So imagine this scene. Me and my dive buddy are going through an underwater cave, and suddenly, everything, for no apparent reason, is tinted red. A color that you are literally supposed to be unable to see while diving at that depth during the day. Upon exiting the cave, everything was back to blue. I thought it was just me, so I didn't signal to go back up. But after the dive, my buddy asked me if I'd seen the water tint red too. We can't explain it, and the folks from the local dive shop had no idea what we were talking about. Left in darkness. During another dive near the Bahamas, I had a frightening experience. It was my first salvage job with them, so I got in with a highly experienced diver. At just over 200 feet deep, we were examining the sunken vessel for rigging points. As I approached the bow of the ship, I noticed he was investigating a damaged portion of the hull. He swam a few feet into the ship looking around, and I asked him a few times if he wanted me to tend his umbilical, his air supply hose, from just outside the ship. It's highly advisable since it's dangerous to enter a sunken ship, to which he stated no. He didn't want to enter the ship. He insisted he was on the port side of the ship. Assuming he was disoriented, I reached in to grab him. Just before touching him, I realized there were no bubbles coming from the helmet. Whatever this was, it wasn't breathing. I backed up and reported that something else was down here, and I expected mockery, but there was none. The next thing I heard was the diving supervisor. Both divers, square yourselves away and get ready to leave bottom. When back on surface, I asked the supervisor about it. He said he refused to put his divers in exceptionally dangerous situations. He then refused to clarify, and we declined to complete the salvage. Mysterious bubble streams. I witnessed another strange occurrence from topside at the location of a planned demolition. It's necessary to explain that one way you could keep track of divers to watch their bubble stream. When a diver inhales, the helmet's demand regulator provides air from their umbilical. Then, when they exhale, it is exhausted into the water and floats up to the surface. On topside, you can watch the bubbles to get a general sense of where the divers are. Now, on this occasion, we were hundreds of miles from land and had placed 2 divers in the water. About an hour into the dive, we started noticing something strange was happening. There were 3 distinct bubble streams coming from where they were working. At first, we assumed there was a current and it was affecting them, but soon we noticed a 4th set of bubbles coming from the distance. It stopped about 20 feet from the divers, near the other mysterious bubbles. We asked the divers, but neither could see anything out of the ordinary. Then, even from the surface, we heard a blood-curdling screech from the waters. Then silence. The divers weren't too concerned. We hear things all the time. Sound travels well in the water, and you learn to assume it's a long distance away. But soon, it looked like the water in the distance was boiling, and it was getting closer. It wasn't boiling, though. It was countless new bubble streams moving near to the location our divers were working. The supervisor ordered the divers to get into the dive stage to be lifted back to the surface. The bubbles were frighteningly close now, and the divers being lifted out said they had begun seeing shadowed figures in the distance. They couldn't quite make out what they were, though. We elected to pull the divers out without completing their decompression stops and throw them into our hyperbaric chamber. Grabbed by the hands of death. Just going to start this off by saying, I'm an idiot when it comes to sea life. When I was little, I would grab smaller moray eels, chase barracudas so I could catch them, would pet sea turtles with shells the diameter of 3 feet or more. But one thing that really scared the heck out of me is when I went down probably 20 feet to grab a big conch shell I saw. And just as I grabbed it, an octopus tentacle the width of my forearm grabbed my arm and squeezed me against the shell. I managed to pull it off me, although it definitely was tough to do so. Needless to say, I surfaced, went back down to look at the perpetrator, then noped the heck away from it while I still had all my fingers intact. The painful silence. Situated halfway between the Philippines and Hawaii, Truk Lagoon was the site of a major battle between the US and Japan in 1944. Around 60 ships and 275 planes sank beneath the waves during a US attack known as Operation Hailstone, and thousands of men went along with them. Human remains litter many of the 69-year-old shipwrecks, but it's the machines that appeared to live on. Japan's Okimaru ship went down with a cargo full of trucks, and now divers reportedly hear the sound of engines turning over and starting up, even when there's no boats on the surface. Strange reports also come from the Fujikarimaru, where grinding noises emanate from the ship's engine room. The crew of Destination Truth explored the underwater ruins of Truk Lagoon and was perplexed to hear an engine idling underwater. They also recorded something that sounded like a human voice, as well as a human-like heat signature. Deep-sea paranoia. Scuba instructors in Santa Rosa, California, reportedly saw a diver with a pink tank floating near the bottom of a local blue hole. When they got closer, however, the diver disappeared. The instructors reported the strange event to police, only to learn that they weren't the first people to encounter the mysterious figure at the bottom of the hole. A similar account appeared in the Toronto Sun in 2007. After an eventful afternoon exploring the waters around Grenada, a group of divers returned to their live-aboard ship to compare notes. One man asked the rest of the group if they'd seen the diver in the white shirt. The other divers thought he was kidding, but the man insisted he'd seen someone. He was wearing a white t-shirt and a scuba tank. He waved at me. The ship's crew immediately took a head count, but no one was missing, and there were no other boats in sight. They never did solve the mystery of the man in white. A hallucination, perhaps. Say no more. Diving in Palau once, and we're about 100 feet. There's a wall on one side of us, and then the ocean just drops as far as the eye can see on the other side. A tiger shark pulled up next to us and just started swimming next to me like I'm his dive buddy or something. At first, I didn't care, but after a few minutes, I started to feel uncomfortable. We kept looking at each other, and he was a good 6 feet, if not a bit more. After a few minutes, a school of yellowfin tuna appeared near us, and all of a sudden, that shark decided he wanted one, and just dive-bombed out and cut one of those tuna in half. In a split second, a couple more sharks appeared, cleaned up the rest, and they all swam off quietly. Made me realize how lightning fast those things are, and absolutely badass. A circling nightmare. I spent a week snorkeling and diving in the Keys. Barracudas are terrifying. I saw a couple of sharks and they ignored me. The barracudas, though, they're curious. I vividly remember being a few feet underwater and looking over my shoulder to see a nasty row of barracuda teeth about 4 feet away. I swam away as calmly as I could for a full minute, stopped, looked over my shoulder, and the thing was in the exact same spot, 4 feet away, like I hadn't even moved. Cadaver rescue dive. Diver qualification and location. Rescue diver in the Bahamas, diving in a submerged blue hole. After an hour or two of searching, I went back into the blue hole to see if there were any signs of him. Saw the glint of his watch and his arm sticking out near the bottom. I started descending down to the bottom to recover the body. On the way down, I realized that the bottom was a school of sharks that must have been there for breeding. So many sharks that they blocked the view of the actual bottom. While we descended into the darkness, grabbed his arm, couldn't stand to look at the body, and started ascending. The sharks followed, and were circling the both of us. I had to take a break at halfway, about 75 feet, as to not get the bends. We were scared shitless. The entire time waiting to normalize, we were scared shitless. Victim was struck by a passing boat. Swimmer gets injured. Down in California, they have caves along the coast that you can swim through, if the tides are right. This particular day, the water level was high enough that you could swim through this one cave that was pretty narrow. Well, it's my turn to swim, and when I'm halfway through, a wave comes in and clears the cave while I'm still in it. I was smashed against the side of the cave, bloodied up the back of my shoulders pretty well. But we're thinking, well shit, we just got in the water. We were planning on swimming out to a buoy and then back to the shore. So I just say, fuck it, let's do it. Exposed wound in an area known for great white sightings. No big deal, gotta get a workout in. We get to the buoy, and I just have the biggest sense of dread. And we're probably a good 15-minute swim from shore. I start thinking about this wound on my arm just leaking shark bait into this giant, vast ocean full of stuff that probably wants to eat me. And sure enough, I'm looking down and I see something swimming towards me, and it's dark. I started swimming away from it, and I turn around and I see two more of the same things coming at me from different directions. My face goes completely white. I'm expecting to get grabbed and pulled under and never be seen again. Nothing happens. My friends could see the look on my face and they're asking me what happened. We all decided to swim in together. My friends were all better swimmers than me, but on that day, I beat them all back to the shore easily. I'm practically kissing the sand when I finally make it to the shore, and this old man comes up to me and says, "You shouldn't be swimming with that cut on your arm. You're attracting sharks." Scary cemeteries. You can dive in man-made lakes and check out what's left of old flooded homes and communities. It's pretty dark and spooky down there, no matter what. Especially when you think of all the big fish swimming around that are barely silhouettes until they're close. My buddy likes to dive in lakes. He said the creepiest thing by far is finding cemeteries, 100 feet plus, beneath the water in the dark, eerie quiet. I asked him about big fish. He said there's definitely stuff down there bigger than he expected, 4 or 5 feet. They're attracted to the lights and noise, but watch from a distance, which is nonetheless disconcerting. Just dark, 2D shapes drifting nearby. Blue hole. I was snorkeling in a blue hole in the Bahamas, and this one didn't go straight down, but kind of at an angle. It was 6 feet high by 20 feet wide, so more like a crack. Now, I'm an avid water dog and can free dive 60 feet if I have flippers on, but this cave being sideways got dark fast. The thing was, there were a ton of angelfish about 25 feet in, so I kept on going down further and further. The last time I went in, I was down far enough I couldn't see more than 10 feet to the sides, so the edges were in complete darkness. All of a sudden, I see a huge mass wiggle out and barely come into view. This was longer than me and probably 4 times as massive. I felt my heart seize up in terror, and I got the heck out of there. Upon reaching the surface and recalling what I saw, I determined it to be a Goliath grouper, which, despite its size, is a mostly harmless fish. Or maybe I'm lying to myself and I saw a sea monster. Either way, I've never been more scared in my life. Cinder block. Grew up diving, as my family owned a dive shop. I've dived all over the globe, But the thing that creeped me out most happened in my local lake. I was about 10 and had taken our ski boat from the dock to a secluded cove to look for an abandoned cemetery. The lake was created by TVA in the 30s and displaced an entire town, leaving several places like this lost in the trees with no access. When I got to the shore, I found a blanket with all the edges tied together to make a bundle. I didn't open it, but I did some exploratory poking. There was obviously a cinder block in there, and the rest was just squishy. After a particularly vigorous poke, blood started seeping through the blanket. I hauled my little ass back to the boat and never looked back. Decades later, I still think about that and wonder what was in there.